The Secret Story of Him, From Enslaved to the Grave, the man who freed more slaves than Harriet Tubman. Chapter 22, Birth of a Nation. It's not about truth, it's about distraction. I stood, and I rose again. My understanding was deeper now. I had lived with hate in my heart and vengeance in my soul for so long, and now I'm born again. Something was different in me. I was a different in. I've killed thousands, 444 of them with my bare hands, to be exact, and another 763 with my poisons. But when you include the Arkemen, all the men, women, and children I forged, trained, and armed, their numbers swell into the tens of thousands, a force no enemy can ignore. We burned down over 80 plantations and wiped out entire towns, destroyed Confederate supply chains, their food, water, hounds, and horses, all poisoned. The smallpox-laced blankets they once gave to the Native Americans, we gave it right back to them. But we never killed the innocent, only those who participated and benefited from the enslavement of human beings. And I would have killed all their asses, if I could have. But the Jasmer reset my energy, God's energy, no longer set to just consume, but to build and to love. This path was greater than me. I was the Arkemen. I held hope for the hopeless. I screamed loud for the voiceless. I was the blade of freedom, not an angel, but a demon for justice. So, when Pamela stepped toward me, tall, slender, a beanpole of a girl whose bones seemed carved from both hunger and stubbornness, it wasn't just a passing encounter. Her eyes didn't just look at you. They searched you, like she was digging for the truth beneath your skin. There was no fear in them, not really. Just a restless storm of questions she'd been carrying far too long. Her dress hung loose, threadbare in the way cotton gets when it's been washed to death in creek water. But she stood like someone who had decided a long time ago she would not break, even if the world cracked in half around her. When she spoke, her voice trembled, not from weakness, but from urgency, the kind that grips your spine and demands you pay attention. She told me she had friends who needed to meet me, not wanted, but needed. It was something in the way she said it, like she was carrying a message heavier than her frame could bear. It made me pause. I didn't know her, but I honored it, because sometimes the revolution taps you on the shoulder in the quietest voices. Porky, who had quietly become my eyes and ears while I recovered, never left my side. He watched everything, listened to everyone, and fed me back the world in fragments, names, whispers, dangers, and hopes, until I could stand on my own again, loyal without question, vigilant without rest. He became the shadow that shielded me and the bridge that kept me connected to the movement pulsing beyond my bed. I sent Denise and Thelma to gather the 10 Arkemen who'd stood with me since we burned Master Samuel's plantation to the ground. Each of them had earned their place not through words, but through blood, vengeance, and an unbreakable oath. They were more than soldiers. They were survivors of unspeakable things, sharpened into instruments of justice. I needed them now, not just for what came next, but for what still haunted us. What began as the formerly scattered runaways had become a legion, 3,324 formerly enslaved souls, united in purpose and rage. I ordered the Arkemen to move, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through the chaos. Move, get every last one of them to the Ida Trail. No delays, no stumbles, no turning back. Keep the old ones steady, lift the little ones high. Cover the weak like your own blood. Push through the swamps, past the hounds, under the moon if you have to. But keep moving. Every step south was a step toward breath, toward life. Get them to Camarón alive. At that moment, I pressed 5 letters into Lil James's hands, his twin Ronnie hovering close, eyes sharp as a hawk's. My fingers trembled not from fear, but from the knowing that each page held the weight of whole lifetimes. One was for Ida, her mind a map of escape routes and miracles, her hands shaping freedom from scraps and shadows. She could see 10 moves ahead, yet never lost the softness in her voice or the way she cared for the smallest soul as if they were her own. Ida taught me that freedom wasn't just a destination on a map. It was a calling etched into the bone. One was for Potwell. When Sino lit the fuse, she turned it into an inferno. Her fire wasn't just in her actions but in her words. Words that lifted me when my body had nothing left and my spirit had gone cold. Potwell walked beside me when I was barely standing, and somehow made me believe I could still rise. Both mothers to my children. I miss them both, loved them both, but I never said it, not once. Never owned how much they loved me, even as they moved on and built lives. The last three were for the children who carry my blood but not my name, the ones I've loved from the shadows, whose names I've never dared to whisper, not even in prayer, not even to myself, for fear the sound might break me. As the larger group moved west toward Camarón, Mexico, thousands strong, barefoot and blood-soaked, the path ahead was scorched clean. Every plantation between us and freedom had been reduced to ash. We didn't pass through the South. We carved through it. Every Confederate soldier, every rebel, every militia, gone, burned out in the night or left hanging from the same trees they once used for terror. We didn't just escape. We erased the slave-holding order mile by mile. This was no migration. This was an exodus written in fire. This was the end, the final days when America could dare to chain any child of God. By 1865, as Union troops marched through the South and the Emancipation Proclamation echoed across battlefields, the institution of slavery was crumbling. The chains forged in centuries of cruelty were breaking under the weight of rebellion, resistance, and unyielding hope. No more would the cries of the enslaved be silenced. No more would children be torn from their mothers' arms without reckoning. This was when I met her, the general. After we broke from the main group, I watched their shadows fade into the forest and onto the Ida Trail. Pamela led me and Porky down a narrow dirt path to a small blue house, weathered but resolute, nestled among endless fields of cotton. It sat just a mile from where the Ida Trail ended, deep in southern Georgia. This humble house was one of the birthplaces of the Underground Railroad's fiercest resistance, a secret refuge where freedom was planned, breathed, and fought. It amazed me how close we were without even knowing it, like the ancestors had been guiding my every step toward her, as if some unseen current, older than time itself, was pulling our spirits together. Two magnets carving a path through the chaos just to connect. God's energy. Up until then, I had never met a white abolitionist. So, when I first crossed paths with the Alexanders, I was stunned into silence. Andrew and Abigail were nothing like the white folk I'd known my whole life. There was no mask in their eyes, no hint of that condescending pity dressed up as kindness. They didn't flinch at my scars or the fire in my voice. They didn't lean in with whispered sympathy. They stood beside me as if I had always been their equal. Andrew carried himself like a man who had seen injustice up close and sworn to spend every breath fighting it. His hands were rough, calloused from real work, not the soft palms of a man who ordered others around. Abigail had the kind of quiet strength that didn't need to be announced. Her gaze was steady, and in it I felt both safety and challenge, like she saw not just who I was, but who I could still become. They didn't talk to me about freedom as if it were a gift they could hand over. They spoke of it like a shared mission, a covenant written in blood and risk. And for the first time in my life, I felt the lines between us and them blur, not erased, but crossed, step by dangerous step. They smiled at Pamela, thanking her for finding us, though their eyes kept drifting toward me, measuring the man she had brought them to meet. Porky's grin stretched wide, nostrils flaring like a hunting hound catching scent, his joy breaking loose as the smell of fresh bread rolled through the still air. Sweet yeast, scorched crust, mingling with the metallic bite of gun oil. I felt her before I saw her, a shift in the world's rhythm, a ripple in the unseen waters, the kind of current the old ones send when history is about to bend. Then they emerged, 20 black Union soldiers, boots pounding in a cadence that shook the ground. each step echoing the march of a people toward a future the enemy swore would never come. Their wool uniforms, Union blue, were sun-bleached and battle-worn, yet their brass buttons blazed in the light like molten gold. Forage caps shadowed eyes that carried both the weight of the lash and the pride of the rifle. Leather cartridge boxes swayed at their sides, and bayonets caught the sun like shards of a fallen star. 8 of them were mine, Arkemen who had vanished north after our plantation raids, trading the rags of the hunted for the sanctioned steel of the United States colored troops. But under the federal blue, they were still forged of the same fire. Freedom fighters who had once ghosted through cypress swamps with me, striking without warning, burning the roots of slavery at their source. All black eagles I had set free, now wings sharpened by war, eyes locked on the horizon. Our vengeance spread wide over the battlefield of history. Their talons gripped rifles instead of torches. But the hunt had not changed. We were still coming for the enemy, still tearing down their world, still building our own in the ashes. Now they stood in the open, soldiers of the Republic, carrying Springfield rifles but still waging the same war. Freedom by any means necessary. And she stepped forward. The soldiers parted without a word, as if the air itself made way for her. Harriet Tubman, general to us, Moses to others, a living myth to all. She was smaller than I had imagined, but there was nothing small about the way she filled the space. Her eyes locked on mine, piercing, unblinking, as if she could read my whole life in a single glance. "Hin," she whispered. "Are you Hin, the man that lives free in Confederate nightmares?" Her frame was small, shoulders straight beneath the plain Union jacket she wore like armor, but her presence filled the space as if the air bent around her. Her eyes fixed on mine, sharp, unflinching, alive with something I recognized instantly. She could see me. "The Arkemen," she said softly, almost to herself. "The one the ancestors told me to find." Her voice wasn't awe. It was recognition. We had never met, but in that moment it was as if we had been walking toward each other our whole lives. I saw in her the same thing she saw in me, the weight of the dead, the fire of the living, and a vow to protect our people that nothing, no master, no army, could break. "Rivers rising," she said, and I caught the double meaning instantly. To the Union, it might sound like weather talk. To those of us who knew, it meant the tide of war was turning, and the time to strike was now. I stepped closer, my eyes locked to hers. "And the hawk?" I asked. Her mouth curved, but it wasn't a smile, it was a promise. "Still hunts at night, only now it carries a Springfield." We clasped hands, calloused, scarred, unyielding. This wasn't the handshake of strangers. It was a binding. The Arkemen and the general, the hawk and the river. She didn't waste words. "We're moving on the Combahee," she said. "Rice plantations along the river, hundreds in chains, gunboats ready, troops in place. We'll take the fields, burn their stores, and free every soul we can carry. But we'll need the shadows cleared before we arrive." I nodded. "The Arkemen will move ahead, cut the telegraph lines, collapse the bridges, poison what they eat, torch what they store. When you hit the shore, there'll be nothing left standing." Her gaze sharpened, as if confirming what she already knew, that the ancestors had not sent her to find me for nothing. "Then let's make this the night the South remembers," he said. "Not for the Union's victory, but for our people's freedom." And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't her raid or mine. This was ours. To rivers joining, to storms becoming one, ready to flood the Confederacy in fire and memory. We didn't sit at a table to plan. We stood there, boots in the dirt, the river breeze carrying the scent of salt and marsh, maps in our minds instead of on paper. Harriet spoke first, her voice clipped but sure. 3 Union gunboats, the Harriet A. Weed, the John Adams, and the Combahee, will move upriver under cover of darkness. I've already walked those banks. The plantations along the Combahee sit low in the tidewater, rice still in the fields. Once the tide is high, the boats can get close enough for the men to disembark without sinking in the mud. She was precise. naming every bend in the river, every inlet and tidal flat, every watchpost she'd scouted herself. I stepped in when she paused. The Arkemen will move first in pairs. We'll cut the telegraph lines between Green Pond and Combahee Ferry by nightfall. No calls for reinforcements. Then we'll cross into the plantations, hit their storehouses, leave their rice spoiled, their salt pork tainted, their mules scattered. Her eyes flicked up to me, weighing the cost. The bridges, gone, I said. The Combahee Ferry bridge and the causeway into Fields Point. Both will be dropped before your boats reach the river mouth. When the rebels wake, they'll find themselves cut off, without food, without weapons, and with nowhere to run but into our hands. She nodded, and then added, we'll move at high tide, around midnight. When the first bridge falls, we'll fire a rocket from the John Adams. That'll be your signal to begin. The 8 Arkemen in her ranks leaned in, exchanging glances. This was a dance they knew well, 2 forces striking as one. They'd fought under her command, and under mine. But tonight the lines between her soldiers and my shadow warriors were gone. I could see the shape of it now. The Arkemen sweeping in ahead of the Union. Gunboats like a phantom tide, leaving ruin in our wake. By the time Harriet's troops landed, the enemy would be starving, panicked, and half-broken, ripe for the blow she was bringing. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. The Confederates call me Moses, she said, but the truth is, I've been walking toward you for years. The ancestors didn't send me to find an ally. They sent me to find the other half of the blade. I met her gaze without flinching. Then let's cut deep. When we broke, it wasn't with words of farewell, but with the silent understanding of 2 forces, about to change the map. Not for the Union, not for glory, but for every soul still bound in chains. By the time the John Adams reached Union waters, Harriet stood at the bow, her face hard against the wind. Behind us, the river carried the smell of ash and blood downstream, a stench the Confederates wouldn't be able to wash from their throats for months. The freed crowded the decks, mothers rocking babies, old men clutching rifles given to them that morning. Boys staring wide-eyed at the black soldiers who had carved them a way out. Harriet walked among them, speaking low, touching shoulders, anchoring them in the new life ahead. I didn't stay for the speeches. The Arkemen had already begun to dissolve into the tree line before the last plantation fire guttered out. No fanfare, no farewell. We never fought for the Union or for its flag. We fought for our own. The shadows were our home. And the South was still crawling with enemies who didn't yet know we had marked them. One by one, my men melted into the swamp paths we'd carved years before. Moses slipped away upriver, heading back toward the Carolina pine barrens where his people still hid. Porky vanished into the cypress brakes, his blade still unwashed, his smile still sharp. I stayed just long enough to find Harriet one last time on the deck. She turned as if she'd felt me before she saw me. You'll be gone before the sun's full up, she said. I was never here, I told her. Her eyes narrowed, not in doubt, but in understanding. The ancestors aren't finished with you. I stepped back, letting the tide and the crowd swallow her from sight. When I reached the bank, the swamp embraced me like an old friend, its mist curling over the water like whispered prayers. Behind me, the river carried 300 souls toward freedom, their hushed voices, a hymn of deliverance that would linger in these waters long after the last boat vanished into dawn. Ahead, the night was deep and waiting, heavy with the weight of what we had unleashed. The flames still danced behind my eyelids, not only the fires we had set, but something older, deeper, the rage of generations, finally given form and fury. By morning, Confederate tongues would wag with ghost stories about what had struck them, that Harriet Tubman came with fire and Union guns. But that something else moved with her, something that slid like smoke through Spanish moss, that wore no uniform and left no tracks in the mud. They weren't wrong. Deceivers. Dawn broke red over Charleston, and with it came the screaming headlines. Raid of the nigger general and her phantom devils. The Charleston Courier shrieked, its ink black as blood. They painted Harriet as a conjurer of dark arts, a sorceress who pulled flame from thin air and commanded, shadow warriors who slipped through swamp water like serpents, evil niggers, they spat, who fought without honor, without uniform, cutting down Christian men in the blessed dark. The Mercury went further, coining a phrase that would haunt their nightmares. The phantom Negroes, a ghost army said to rise from the muck of the low country, led by a demon wrought from centuries of revenge and witchcraft, deadlier than any rifle, more terrible than Sherman's march. In plantation parlors across the state, masters whispered behind crystal glasses and trembling hands. They spoke of midnight raids where torches bloomed like hellflowers, where great houses crumbled to ash and bone, where their human property vanished like morning mist, spirited away by an enemy that came without warning, struck without mercy, and melted into darkness before a soul could cry out to God. Some swore they had seen us, figures moving wrong in the moonlight, too fast, too silent, cutting through their world like judgment itself. Across Union lines, official reports told another story entirely. The War Department's dispatches were scrubbed clean as a Sunday sermon, calling it a strategic military operation, resulting in the successful liberation of approximately 300 enslaved persons with minimal casualties to Union forces. The capture of rice plantations was noted with bureaucratic precision. The destruction was termed regrettable but necessary. No mention of the Arkemen, no record of the blood soaking deep into swamp soil or the fires that burned with centuries of fury. To northern newspapers, it was victory made neat, almost too neat for anyone who understood the true cost of freedom. But in the quiet corners of Union camps, among the black soldiers who had witnessed our work, different stories circulated. They spoke of shadows that moved with purpose, of retribution that came swift and final, of justice served hot as the flames that consumed Combahee oppression. The Arkemen were real, but only if you knew how to look past the lies both sides were eager to tell. Harriet Tubman became the face history would remember, and rightly so. Her courage, her vision, her unbreakable will. She was the Moses who led our people from bondage, the general who made the impossible inevitable. But the shadows belonged to us. We were the Arkemen, the black eagles who never slept, the storm beneath the river's surface, the answer to prayers whispered in slave quarters for generations. We were the price oppression finally had to pay, delivered not by divine intervention, but by human hands that would not turn the other cheek again. And I was still out there, in the swamp's embrace, moving through Spanish moss and cypress shadow like a ghost with unfinished business, the protector of a people who had learned that sometimes freedom is not won by turning the other cheek. Sometimes it comes from lighting fires so bright they can be seen from heaven itself. The river had carried 300 souls to safety that night, but it carried something else as well, a promise written in blood and flame, whispered on the wind through the marsh grass. We are coming. We are justice delayed but not denied. We are the children of those who survived, and we do not forgive. We do not forget, and we do not sleep. The swamp closed around me like a benediction, and somewhere in the distance, I could swear I heard the sound of wings, black wings beating against the storm. The war didn't end with bugles. It didn't end with waving flags and boys marching home under sunset. It ended in filth, in the stink of rot, in the ragged breathing of men too mangled to even pray. Richmond burned like a rotting tooth ripped from the jaw of the Confederacy. Union soldiers marched through streets still hot with fire, boots crunching on glass and bone. Slaves, no free people now, picked through the ruins, searching for kin, for bread, for a sign that all this blood meant something. The great Southern dream lay face down in the gutter, haze and ash swirling in the same water. The men who once called themselves masters scurried like rats, whining for mercy from the very people they once owned. And the Arkemen, we didn't come to grant mercy. We came to collect every lash, every rape, every child sold under God's sky. We carried those debts in our bones, And the final payment came due in smoke and screaming. We burned their cotton. We gutted their mansions. We left their sons bleeding in the mud, with the same indifference they gave us as we buried our own in shallow graves. Some Union officers looked away. Some even helped. They knew what we knew. There are crimes too deep for courts, too old for laws. Lee surrendered Appomattox, sure. Brad shook his hand. The papers called it peace. But peace doesn't grow in soil fed on 400 years of blood. That kind of earth only grows ghosts. So we stood in the ruins of the Old South, black smoke curling into a sky that didn't care. And we knew the truth. The war wasn't over. It would keep fighting in schools, in ballot boxes, in nooses thrown over courthouse oaks. It would keep fighting in laws written to chain us without chains. It would keep fighting in the eyes of men who swore the Union oath but still called us boy. But for that one breath, in that one goddamn moment, we stood on their ashes and knew we had shattered their world. We had broken their spine. And him, the man they called the Phantom of the Arkemen, was still out there in the smoke, hunting the last of them. We weren't fucking sorry. And we weren't done.
Thank you for listening to The Secret Story of Him, From Enslaved to the Grave. The Man Who Freed More Slaves Than Harriet Tubman by C.A. Witts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This is the greatest truth ever told.